They said she flew too carefully. That hesitation would get her killed. The F-16 screams over the desert as Lieutenant Rachel Noor drops into a training run. No one survives twice. Her hands are steady. Her voice is calm. But the simulation isn't random. Every threat pattern, every warning tone, was built from the flight that killed her mother. Command expects her to pull out. Instead, Rachel pushes the nose down and flies straight into the fire. Before we continue, pause for just a second. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from right now. Different countries, different time zones. But tonight, we're all flying into the same fire together. The F-16 cuts across the Nevada sky like it's following a line only Rachel Noor can see. Sunlight flashes along the canopy. The desert below blurs into tan geometry. Dry lake beds, ridgelines, empty miles where nothing moves unless it's supposed to. Inside the cockpit, everything vibrates with controlled violence. Airframe hum, engine whine, the quiet, constant pressure of speed. Rachel's breathing is steady. Viper 2-1 entering the box, she says. Her voice doesn't rise. It doesn't rush. It lands exactly where it should. The training run is complex by design. Multiple threat emitters, dynamic targets, simulated surface-to-air systems that light up without warning. The scenario is meant to overload instinct to force mistakes. Rachel doesn't make any. She adjusts altitude by meters, not hundreds of feet. Her turns are clean, economical. No wasted movement. No drama. She anticipates each threat before the system fully paints it, sliding just outside engagement envelopes, never flirting with the red unless there's a reason. Her hands barely move on the controls. Data streams scroll across the HUD. Numbers stack, angles align, timelines compress. She checks in with her wingman, short, calm confirmations. No extra words, no clipped urgency, just enough to keep the formation tight and breathing slow. When the final simulated threat activates, Rachel doesn't surge forward. She doesn't snap into aggression. She waits half a second. Then she executes. The maneuver is precise. Textbook, but cleaner than the book ever describes. The jet responds as if it's reading her thoughts. The threat dissolves into a green confirmation symbol. Run complete. The range goes quiet. Back on the ground. The jets cool under the sun, ticking softly as metal contracts. The smell of fuel hangs in the air. Rachel climbs down the ladder, helmet tucked under her arm, sweat cooling against her spine. Other pilots talk loudly nearby, replaying moments, laughing, arguing about who pushed harder, who went lower, who cut it closest. Rachel says nothing. Inside the briefing room, the lights are bright and unforgiving. Screens line the walls, already filling with graphs, timelines, overlays. The data doesn't lie. It never does. Rachel sits straight-backed at the table, hands folded loosely in her lap. Her flight suit is unwrinkled, her expression neutral. The lead instructor steps forward, remote in hand. Let's talk about Lieutenant Noor's run. Graphs expand across the screen. Her flight path appears, smooth, controlled arcs threading through threat zones with mathematical elegance. A low murmur moves through the room. Clean, someone says quietly. Too clean, another voice replies. The instructor taps the remote. Numbers appear, reaction times, decision points, margins. Technically, he says, this is one of the most accurate executions we've seen this cycle. Rachel doesn't react. The instructor pauses, letting that sit. Which is exactly the problem. The room stills. He switches slides. A moment from mid-run freezes on the screen. Rachel's jet holding steady just outside a simulated engagement zone. You waited here, he says. Rachel nods once. Threat confidence was incomplete. You had clearance to press. Yes, sir. So why didn't you? Rachel doesn't answer immediately. She replays the moment in her head, the data, the angles, the probability curve flattening before it rose. It wasn't necessary, she says. A few instructors exchange looks. The word comes next, dropped without volume but heavy enough to shift the room. Hesitation. Is not shouted. Is not framed as an accusation. Is worse than that. said like a diagnosis. Rachel feels it land, low and solid, right behind her ribs. The instructor continues, already moving on. In high-threat environments, seconds matter. Aggression matters. Waiting for perfect certainty can get you killed. Rachel keeps her gaze forward. On the screen, her data continues to glow. Green indicators, optimal ranges, near-perfect efficiency. Flawless, and somehow insufficient. The debrief moves on to other pilots. Louder runs. Sloppier recoveries. Near misses that earn nods and half-smiles because they felt bold. Rachel listens. She always does. When it's over, chairs scrape back. Pilots stand, stretch, talk over one another. The room fills with noise again. Rachel stays seated a moment longer, eyes on the frozen image of her jet, holding steady in the sky. She knows that moment. She remembers the exact pressure on the stick, the micro-adjustment in throttle, the calm certainty that she was in control. Outside the room, she hears someone say her name, not loudly, not meant for her. She's good. A voice says, but the word trails off, unfinished. Rachel stands, helmet tucked under her arm again, and walks out into the sun. The heat hits her instantly, sharp and dry. Jets taxi in the distance, engines roaring like nothing ever went wrong. She pauses for a fraction of a second on the tarmac, looking back toward the sky where her run unfolded perfectly, exactly as planned. No mistakes, no warnings, no failures. And yet, if she's perfect, she thinks, why isn't she enough? The hallway outside the briefing room is narrow and loud, all concrete walls and echoing boots. Pilots peel off in clusters, voices overlapping, energy still buzzing from the run. Someone laughs too hard. Someone else reenacts a turn with their hands, banking an invisible jet through invisible fire. Rachel walks alone. She keeps her pace even, helmet balanced against her hip, eyes forward. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. Her pulse has settled, but the word from the debrief still lingers, uninvited. Hesitation. She rounds the corner toward the lockers when she hears her name. Not spoken to her. Spoken about her. She's sharp, a senior voice says. Male. Calm. Someone with years stitched into his flight suit. I'll give her that. Another voice answers, lower. Yeah, just like. There's a pause. Not long. Barely a breath. You know. Rachel doesn't slow. She doesn't turn her head. She keeps walking as if she didn't hear anything at all. Behind her, the conversation shifts. Words dissolve into noise again. But the pause stays with her. The deliberate absence where a name should have been. She reaches her locker and sets the helmet down gently, lining it up the way she always does. Her hands move out of habit, unfastening gloves, smoothing the fabric of her sleeves. Around her, metal doors clang open and shut. Laughter rises and falls. No one says the name. They never do. Rachel learned that early, before flight school, before the desert, before the jet ever answered to her hands. The name exists in the space between sentences, in lowered voices and glances that last half a second too long. It follows her without being spoken. She closes her locker and turns, nearly colliding with a captain she doesn't recognize. He steps aside quickly, polite, eyes flicking to her name patch and then away. Good run, he says. Neutral. Careful. Thank you, sir. He nods and moves on. Outside, the afternoon heat presses down hard, flattening shadows against the concrete. Rachel crosses the tarmac toward the admin building, boots crunching on gravel. Jets idle in the distance, their sound a constant presence. Never silent, never forgiving. She's halfway across when someone calls out, Lieutenant Noor. She stops. A training officer stands near the edge of the hangar, one hand resting on a clipboard. Captain rank, older than her instructors. His expression is unreadable, not stern, not friendly, just alert. Yes, sir. He gestures subtly toward the shade cast by the hangar wall. Not a command, an invitation. Rachel steps over. For a moment he says nothing. He glances out toward the flight line, scanning the movement of crews and aircraft as if checking who's within earshot. Then he lowers his voice. They're watching you differently, he says. Rachel doesn't ask who they are. She already knows. Yes, sir. The officer studies her face, maybe looking for a reaction. He doesn't get one. You understand what I mean? He asks. I do. He exhales through his nose, a quiet sound. Your performance today was impressive. On paper. Rachel waits. But perception matters here, he continues. Fair or not. She meets his eyes now. Am I doing something wrong, sir? He hesitates. Just slightly. Enough that Rachel notices. No, he says finally. You're doing everything right. The words don't land as reassurance. They're not evaluating you in isolation, he adds. That's all I'm saying. Rachel nods once. Thank you for the heads up, sir. He seems to want to say more. His mouth opens, then closes again. He straightens, professionalism snapping back into place. Dismissed. Rachel steps away, the sun swallowing her again as she leaves the shade. She walks until the sounds of the flight line soften behind her, until the world narrows to the steady rhythm of her boots and the quiet churn of her thoughts. She's been here before. Not this base, not this heat, but this feeling, the sense of being measured against something she didn't choose. In the locker room later, the mirrors are fogged with steam from the showers. Rachel changes slowly, methodically. She folds her flight suit instead of tossing it, aligns her gear with care. Around her, conversations drift. Reminds me of, yeah, but that didn't end well. You think they'll? The sentences break apart when she gets too close. No one is cruel. No one is overt. That's what makes it worse. Rachel finishes changing and steps into the cooler air of the corridor, duffel slung over her shoulder. She pauses near a window overlooking the runway. Another jet lifts off, roaring into the sky, climbing fast and aggressive, leaving nothing behind but heat distortion. She watches until it's a speck. She wonders briefly if that's what they want from her. More speed, less space, a willingness to push until there's no margin left. She knows how to do that. She also knows what happens when there's no margin. Rachel turns away from the window and continues down the hall. Her reflection follows her in the glass, calm, composed, controlled. On the surface, she's just another pilot earning her place. Underneath, she feels the weight of comparison pressing closer, shaping the air around her. She isn't being judged on what she did today. She's being measured against a story that started long before she ever climbed into a cockpit. A story no one tells out loud. A name no one says. And whether she wants it or not, Rachel understands now. She's flying inside its shadow. The room is small, windowless, and colder than it needs to be. Rachel sits alone at the terminal, chair pulled close to the desk, shoulders squared as if posture might keep the past in its place. The hum of the computer fills the silence, steady and indifferent. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, washing everything in a pale, colorless glow. On the screen, a paused video frame. The image is grainy, slightly distorted at the edges, helmet cam footage years old. The timestamp in the corner blinks steadily, frozen mid-second. Rachel exhales slowly and taps the key. The footage plays. Sky first. Endless and bright, the blue broken only by the curve of the canopy. Wind noise rushes through the audio, layered with breathing, controlled, familiar in a way that tightens something in Rachel's chest. Her mother's voice, not emotional, not rushed, professional. Altitude numbers tick down along the edge of the display. Target symbology flickers. The jet banks, smooth and deliberate, the horizon tilting with practiced ease. Rachel leans forward slightly, eyes tracking every movement. She's seen this before, dozens of times. Enough that she knows the sequence by heart, but she watches anyway, as if something new might reveal itself if she looks hard enough. The environment is different from modern training runs. Older overlays, less visual clutter, but the fundamentals are the same. Airspeed, angle of attack, threat warnings pulsing softly at the edge of awareness. Her mother adjusts the throttle. The jet responds instantly, Rachel's fingers twitch unconsciously against the desk, mirroring the motion. Entering the stack, her mother says on the recording. Rachel swallows. The camera shakes slightly as turbulence rattles the airframe. The breathing grows more pronounced. Not panicked, just working. Managing G-forces. Staying ahead of the aircraft. Then the threats begin to appear. Simulated but aggressive. Warning tones chime, measured, insistent. The system paints engagement zones in faint red arcs that bloom and fade as the jet maneuvers. Rachel's gaze flicks to the margins, watching the numbers tighten. Her mother flies close, not recklessly, precisely. The jet skirts the edge of danger with a confidence Rachel recognizes instantly. The same instinct she feels in her own hands. The same calculation, how much space is enough. The footage cuts briefly to static. Rachel stiffens. The image returns, closer now. Lower altitude. The terrain rises faster beneath the nose. Her mother's breathing steadies again. There's a moment, just a moment, where the jet holds level. Rachel pauses the video. The frame freezes. This is it. She knows it before the thought fully forms. The dive hasn't started yet. The nose is still just above the horizon line. The data overlays show a narrowing window, seconds, maybe less. Rachel zooms in, enlarging the image until the pixels soften. She studies the tiny movements, the subtle shift of the canopy frame, the way the symbology aligns just slightly off-center. She tries to read what isn't there. What were you seeing? She scrubs backward a few seconds, then forward again. Plays it at half speed, quarter speed. Her mother's hand comes into view for an instant, reflected faintly in the canopy. A gloved shape moving toward the controls. Rachel pauses again. This frame has haunted her for years, because everything after it is gone. She scrolls down the file list. Mission_CM_03. Mission_CM_04. Mission_CM_05. The next entry is corrupted. The final seconds, classified, redacted, or simply lost, exist only as a blank space where answers should be. Rachel sits back in her chair, the cold seeping through the thin fabric of her uniform. She knows the official report by heart. Mechanical anomaly. Training environment variables. Pilot error listed as a contributing factor. Never explicitly stated, but implied in the careful language of investigation. What the report never says is why. Why her mother chose not to abort earlier. Why she stayed in the envelope instead of pulling away. Why she committed when retreat was still possible. Rachel stares at the frozen image. Her mother wasn't reckless. Rachel knows that the way she knows her own breathing pattern under strain. The way she knows the difference between fear and focus. She leans forward again, resting her elbows on the desk, chin hovering just above her clasped hands. Why didn't you pull out? She whispers, the words barely audible. The screen offers no reply. Rachel notices details she's never fully considered before. The slight asymmetry in the threat indicators, the way one warning tone overlaps another by a fraction of a second. The system wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. It was crowded, complicated, human. She imagines herself in that cockpit, feeling the pressure build, the margin narrowing. She imagines the weight of expectation, not from command, not from doctrine, but from inside. The quiet insistence to finish what you started, to trust your skill. Rachel straightens, a realization brushing the edge of her thoughts. This wasn't hesitation. It was commitment. She freezes again, staring at the moment just before the dive. The jet balanced between choice and consequence. Her mother's voice echoes softly from the speakers as Rachel rewinds the clip once more. Copy. Her mother says in the recording, calm as ever. Copy what? The answer died with the footage. Rachel sits in silence after the video ends, the final frame still glowing on the screen. The hum of the computer feels louder now, intrusive. She reaches out and rests her fingers lightly against the glass, just beneath the frozen horizon line. What choice were you about to make? The question lingers, unanswered, heavy as the desert heat outside the building's walls. Rachel closes the file without deleting it. She stands slowly, chair scraping softly against the floor, and takes one last look at the blank space where the ending should be. Somewhere in those missing seconds is the truth. Not just about her mother's final flight, but about the thin line between caution and courage. Rachel turns off the monitor. The room goes dark, and the ghost of that unfinished dive follows her out. Colonel Dana Whitaker does not raise her voice. She doesn't need to. The briefing room quiets the moment she steps inside, conversation tapering off like engines spooling down. Whitaker stands at the front with her hands clasped behind her back. Flight jacket immaculate, posture effortless. Her presence carries weight earned over decades, not just hours logged, but decisions made when no one else wanted to make them. Rachel sits halfway down the table, spine straight, eyes forward. The screen behind Whitaker flickers to life. Today's exercise, Whitaker begins, will be different. No preamble, no build-up. She taps the remote. A three-dimensional map blooms across the display. Urban terrain stitched into desert contours, layered with translucent grids that pulse faintly as they adjust. This is a hybrid environment, Whitaker continues. Live aircraft, real airspace, augmented threat architecture. A few pilots exchange looks. Rachel's attention sharpens. The system adapts, Whitaker says. Not to the scenario, to you. The map shifts subtly, lines tightening, nodes rearranging themselves in response to unseen inputs. Your decisions change the battlefield, Whitaker adds. Your timing, your confidence, your hesitation. The last word lands without emphasis. Rachel feels it anyway. Whitaker's gaze sweeps the room, methodical, assessing. When her eyes meet Rachel's, they linger for half a second longer than necessary. Not hostile, curious. Assignments have been made, Whitaker says, tapping the remote again. Names appear beside flight positions. Rachel, Noor, second element lead. A few heads turn. Nothing overt. Just enough to register. Rachel keeps her expression neutral. This exercise is designed to test composure under pressure, Whitaker continues. Not aggression. Not heroics. Control. She pauses. Control, she repeats, as if defining the word for the room. The lights dim slightly as the display zooms in on a narrow corridor through the simulated terrain. This airspace will respond to how you fly it, Whitaker says. Push too hard, and the threats escalate. Hold back, and they close in. Pilot raises a hand. Ma'am, what's the success metric? Whitaker doesn't answer immediately. She studies the map, then looks back at the room. That, she says, is for you to figure out. The briefing ends without further clarification. Outside, the sun is already high, baking the tarmac until heat ripples distort the horizon. Rachel walks toward the flight line with the others, helmet tucked under her arm, the weight of the assignment settling into her shoulders. Second element lead. Not command. Not spectator. A position that requires judgment more than authority. As ground crew swarm the aircraft, Rachel climbs the ladder into the cockpit. The familiar scent of metal and electronics wraps around her, grounding her. She straps in, movements precise, ritualistic. Systems come alive around her. Viper 2-1, comms check. Loud and clear, she replies. As the engine spools, Rachel glances at the HUD. The overlays look normal at first, clean, minimal. Then, gradually, additional layers fade in. Threat zones shimmer faintly at the edges of perception. Data that isn't supposed to be there yet. The fire waiting to speak. Viper flight, taxi approved, comes over the radio. Rachel eases the jet forward, following the painted lines toward the runway. Her breathing slows, syncing with the rhythm of the aircraft. She doesn't look toward the control tower, but she knows Whitaker is watching. Not just the takeoff, everything after. The jets lift cleanly into the sky, the desert falling away beneath them. Once airborne, the simulation begins to assert itself. Signals bloom and recede. The environment feels alert, responsive in a way that prickles along Rachel's awareness. She adjusts altitude slightly. The threat indicators adjust with her. She banks left, The grid tightens. Rachel steadies her hand. "This thing's touchy," her wingman says, a hint of nerves slipping into his voice. "Maintain spacing," Rachel replies. "Don't chase it." She keeps her tone even, unhurried. As they enter the designated airspace, the cityscape resolves beneath them, virtual structures layered seamlessly over the real desert terrain. Streets, rooftops, shadows that move when they shouldn't. Rachel feels the pressure rise, subtle but persistent. This isn't a static scenario. It's watching. She makes a minor correction, barely a nudge. The system responds immediately, lighting up a new vector. Rachel's jaw tightens. "Copy adjustments," she says calmly. Inside the cockpit, the fire begins to whisper, warning tones overlapping, cues stacking just fast enough to test reaction without tipping into chaos. Rachel doesn't rush. She breathes. She remembers Whitaker's words. Control. Then the commander's voice cuts in, cool and uninflected, carried across the radio like a scalpel. "Lieutenant Noor," Whitaker says, "this environment will not wait for certainty." Rachel keeps her eyes forward. "Understood, ma'am." A brief pause follows. Then Whitaker adds, quietly, "Let's see what you do when the fire talks back." The line goes silent. Rachel adjusts her grip on the controls, not tightening, not loosening, just enough to feel the aircraft answer. She recognizes this now for what it is. Not an evaluation, not a lesson, a deliberate push. This isn't training. It's a provocation. The exercise doesn't announce itself. There's no clear moment where the scenario starts, no sharp line between normal airspace and something else. It seeps in quietly, like heat rising through metal, until Rachel feels it everywhere at once. Threat indicators bloom along the edges of her HUD. Not one, not two, several. They appear faster than expected, stacking in uneven layers that don't follow the clean logic of standard training runs. The system should pace itself, introduce pressure gradually, allow pilots to orient. This doesn't. Urban terrain resolves beneath them with unsettling clarity. Virtual high-rises cast shadows that slide across real desert ground. Streets grid themselves into existence, tight and crowded. Rooftops cluttered with simulated antennae and heat sources. Civilian noise fills the audio channel. Sirens, traffic, shouted voices layered faintly under the engine roar. Just loud enough to register, not loud enough to ignore. Rachel's stomach tightens. "This is busy," her wingman mutters. "Stay with the profile," Rachel replies. "Filter what doesn't matter." She sounds calm. She feels anything but. Signals overlap on her display. Some sharp and aggressive, others soft and ambiguous. Warning tones begin to step on each other, out of sequence like instruments tuning to different keys. Rachel checks her timing. Too fast. She makes a slight adjustment to spacing. The threat envelope reacts immediately, tightening instead of easing. That's not right. She eases back, testing the boundary. The system presses closer. Rachel frowns, eyes flicking across the data. The geometry feels off, not random but specific. Angles intersect at familiar points. Vectors converge in a way that pulls at her memory. She's seen this shape before. A tall structure slides past beneath her left wing, its shadow stretching across a narrow corridor between buildings. The simulated street below curves sharply, funneling movement inward. Rachel's breath catches. She knows this turn, not consciously, not yet, but her hands adjust before she tells them to, nudging the jet into a line that feels rehearsed. Viper 2-1. Confirm heading. A controller calls. Confirming. Rachel answers automatically. Her mind is racing now, connecting fragments. The compressed airspace. The overlapping threats. The way the system punishes hesitation by closing in instead of backing off. This isn't adaptive. It's scripted. Her wingman's voice cracks slightly. "I've got conflicting locks. Can you verify primary?" Rachel glances at his position, then back to her own display. "I see it," she says. "Ignore the ghost signal. Stay with me." Ghost signal. The word slips out before she can stop it. Her heart rate ticks up. The urban grid tightens further, buildings rising higher, crowding the corridor. Civilian noise spikes, layered now with distant explosions that aren't tied to any visible threat source. It's disorienting by design. Rachel swallows. She adjusts altitude just enough to buy space. The system answers by throwing another warning tone into the mix. Her jaw tightens. This is wrong. Training scenarios are aggressive, but they're consistent. The rules may be harsh, but they're legible. This feels personal. She banks left to avoid a tightening envelope and sees it clearly now. The angle of approach, the narrowing escape vector, the way the city forces her lower whether she wants to go there or not. Recognition hits her like sudden turbulence. She's flown this before. Not in this jet. Not in this sky. But in fragments burned into her memory from a grainy helmet cam video she's watched more times than she can count. Her pulse thuds in her ears. The corridor. The descent angle. The way the threats don't come from one direction but many. Rachel steadies her breathing. Maintain formation, she tells her wingman. Do not chase the signals. But there. I know, she says. Stay with me. She doesn't say I've seen this. She doesn't say this ends badly. She keeps her voice level. The system throws another complication at them. Data latency, just enough to introduce doubt. The cityscape below flickers subtly. Buildings shifting position by meters that feel like miles at this speed. Rachel's hands move with practiced economy, compensating before panic can take hold. She feels a strange duality settle over her. Part of her is here now, calculating angles, managing risk, flying the jet in front of her. Another part of her is elsewhere, watching from outside the moment, tracing familiar lines toward an ending she doesn't want to reach. This layout's messed up, her wingman says, breathing faster. It's like it's closing on us. Rachel doesn't deny it. She doesn't confirm it either. She checks the margins again. They're shrinking. The threats don't escalate because of mistakes. They escalate because she exists inside them. Her mother's final flight flickers through her mind. Not as images, but as sensation. The pressure behind the eyes. The narrowing focus. The knowledge that there's a choice coming, even if you don't know what it is yet. Rachel feels it now. The approach vector aligns almost perfectly with the frozen frame she remembers, the one just before the dive. Her fingers twitch. She corrects herself immediately. Not yet. The system pings again, insistent. She recognizes the pattern fully now, and with it comes a cold clarity that settles into her bones. This isn't coincidence. The geometry isn't similar. It's the same. Her chest tightens, but her voice remains steady as she issues another correction, guiding her wingman through a narrow window that feels uncomfortably familiar. She hears her own breathing in the headset, controlled, deliberate, echoing the cadence she heard in the ghost footage. For the first time since the exercise began, Rachel feels something other than pressure. She feels watched, not by command, by the past. The city stretches out ahead of her, funneling them toward a decision point she hasn't reached yet, but can already sense, looming just beyond the next turn. The system hums, alive and alert, waiting to see what she'll do. Rachel keeps flying, but inside her, the realization settles fully into place, heavy and undeniable. The past isn't being remembered, it's being replayed. In real time, the alert isn't loud. It doesn't scream or flash red or demand attention the way threats usually do. It arrives quietly, tucked into the corner of Rachel's display like an afterthought. Data packet received. Rachel blinks. That shouldn't be there. Training feeds are locked, closed loops tightly controlled. No external uploads. No stray information drifting into a live exercise. Her fingers hover over the controls for half a second longer than necessary. Viper 2-1, you seeing that? Her wingman asks, voice tight. I see it, Rachel replies. She doesn't open it right away. The city below continues to slide past, buildings rising and falling with unnerving familiarity. Threat indicators pulse, patient and persistent. The system waits. Rachel diverts a fraction of her attention and taps the packet open. The overlay expands across her HUD, and the world tilts. A timestamp appears first, Small, clinical, impossible to misunderstand. It's old. Years old. Her breath catches as her eyes lock onto the numbers. Her mind already racing ahead of what they mean. She doesn't want to look further. She does anyway. The threat layout materializes next. Vector lines, engagement zones, probability cones rendered in stark, unmistakable clarity. Rachel's grip tightens on the controls. It matches. Not roughly. Not abstractly. Exactly. The angles. The spacing. The way multiple threat arcs overlap just enough to squeeze the margin without fully closing it. The asymmetry she noticed earlier, the slight imbalance that makes decision-making feel heavier than it should. Her stomach drops. The final layer loads. Final descent vector. A thin line appears, extending forward and down through the virtual city, threading between structures toward a point Rachel knows without needing it labeled. She's seen this line before, frozen on a screen, paused just before everything vanished. The cockpit feels suddenly too small. Air presses in around her, thick and unmoving, as if the sky itself is holding its breath. This can't be right, her wingman says, panic leaking through his attempt at calm. That packet, it's... Rachel doesn't answer. She doesn't need to hear the rest. Her mind has already completed the picture, assembling fragments she's carried for years into a shape she never expected to see again, much less fly through. This isn't a resemblance. This isn't coincidence. This is replication. The system didn't stumble into this geometry. It was built on it. Her mother's accident, stripped of context, reduced to data, fed into an adaptive model and resurrected as a test. Rachel's chest tightens, a sharp, contained pressure that threatens to fracture her composure. Her breathing stays steady through sheer force of habit. The radio crackles with distant voices, controllers, observers, layers of authority she barely registers. Inside the cockpit, the past overlays the present so cleanly it's impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. Her mother's voice echoes in her memory. Not the words, but the tone. Calm, focused, certain. Rachel glances again at the descent vector. This is the moment that was missing, not the outcome, the choice. Her hands feel heavier now, as if the controls carry more than the weight of the aircraft. Every adjustment she makes feels watched, not just measured but compared. The realization settles fully, undeniable and cold. They didn't just train pilots against danger. They trained them against her mother, against the exact scenario that killed her. Her wingman speaks again, voice strained. Rachel, what is this? She swallows. It's legacy data, she says carefully. The word tastes wrong. Legacy implies honor. This feels like excavation. The threats continue to pulse, patient and expectant. The city stretches ahead, funneling them toward the same narrowing corridor Rachel has traced in her mind since she was old enough to understand what flight meant. Her mother's final mission isn't history, it's architecture, and Rachel is flying inside it. The guidance comes in smoothly, almost gently. Viper 2-1. A controller says, voice calm and authoritative. Recommend abort profile in 10 seconds. Not an order, a suggestion framed as concern. Rachel acknowledges without comment, her eyes never leaving the narrowing corridor ahead. The descent vector glows faintly on her display, a silent reminder of where this path leads. Her wingman's breathing is loud now, short, uneven bursts cutting through the comms. I'm getting saturated, he says. Too many inputs. Stay with me, Rachel replies. One thing at a time, but the system doesn't slow. Threat tones stack closer together, overlapping just enough to blur into a continuous pressure. The city tightens its grip, buildings rising like walls, shadows stretching across the flight path. Recommend abort. The controller repeats, this time with a trace of urgency. Rachel feels the pull of it. Abort means space, altitude, distance from the edge. Abort means survival. The parameters appear on her HUD, clean, inviting lines showing exactly how to disengage. A smooth climb, a widening arc away from the urban grid. Safety rendered as geometry. She's trained for this. Every pilot is. When uncertainty spikes, when variables exceed tolerance, you pull out. You preserve the aircraft. You live to fly again. Her wingman's voice cracks. Rachel, I think we should abort. She hears fear there, not shameful, not weak. Human. I hear you, she says. The system seems to sense the hesitation. Threat envelopes loosen slightly, as if rewarding the consideration of retreat. The pressure eases just enough to make the choice feel right. This is the trap. Rachel recognizes it with chilling clarity. The model expects this. The scenario is designed to push pilots to this exact moment, to see who aborts cleanly and who hesitates too long, to catalog responses, to confirm conclusions drawn years ago. She glances at the data packet again, still open in the corner of her display. Her mother's final descent vector remains visible, steady, and patient. Abort now, and Rachel will do what everyone expects. She will survive. She will prove the narrative correct. Careful, hesitant, just like the thought cuts off before it finishes. Command comes back on the line, firmer now. Viper 2-1, this is a safety call. Abort recommended. Say intentions. Say intentions. Rachel's throat tightens. She feels the weight of eyes she can't see. Evaluators, analysts, commanders watching her data trace in real time, waiting to see if the story holds. Her wingman's breathing spikes again, bordering on panic. Please advise. Rachel steadies her voice, even as her pulse hammers against her ribs. Maintain formation, she says. Do not execute abort yet. The words hang in the air. The system responds immediately. Threat indicators flare brighter. The corridor narrows further, punishing the delay. The choice sharpens, edges cutting closer. Rachel knows this moment. She's lived with it her entire life, framed by a frozen image and an unfinished ending. Abort now, and history repeats itself quietly, neatly, without anyone ever calling it failure. Survival at this point means doing exactly what the system and the story expects her to do. And Rachel feels the weight of that expectation pressing down harder than any threat tone ever could. The noise reaches a peak. Warnings overlap. Controllers speak at once. The city presses in from all sides, a maze of concrete and shadow tightening its grip around the flight path. Rachel lets it wash over her. Then she cuts through it. She doesn't respond to command. She doesn't announce intent. She doesn't ask. Her hand moves, measured, deliberate, and the nose of the F-16 dips. Not sharply, not aggressively, slowly. The descent begins almost politely, as if the jet is testing whether she truly means it. Her wingman inhales sharply. Rachel, I've got you, she says, her voice calm, steady, unmistakably present. Eyes on me, match my rate. The dive deepens. Altitude bleeds away in controlled increments, numbers ticking down with unnerving smoothness. Doctrine warns against this profile, too slow to outrun threat escalation, too deep to recover easily if something goes wrong. Rachel knows that. That's why she chooses it. The system reacts immediately. Threat indicators flare brighter, converging faster now, impatient. It wants speed, panic, a sudden move it can punish. Rachel gives it neither. She eases the jet down, angle precise, throttle disciplined. The airframe shudders slightly as denser air grabs hold, vibrations traveling up through the seat and into her spine. Her breathing slows. In the headset, her wingman's breath is ragged. Listen to me, Rachel says, cutting in gently. Breathe in. Count 4. Out for 4. Stay with my wings. She banks just enough to show him the line, the narrow corridor threading between structures below. The city rushes up faster now, details sharpening, rooftops, windows, simulated movement along streets that don't exist. The fire speaks louder. Rachel ignores it. She isn't fighting the system. She's managing it. Her hands make small, continuous adjustments, smoothing the descent, keeping the jet balanced on the edge where physics still answers. She feels every shift in pressure, every tremor of resistance. This is control, not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself. The quiet kind. Command breaks in again, urgency stripped bare. Viper 2-1. You are below recommended. Rachel switches channels without ceremony. Silence. For the first time since the exercise began, there is space inside her head. She focuses on the aircraft, on her wingman, on the line ahead. Good, she tells him as his breathing steadies slightly. Just like that. Don't chase the warnings. They're late. The system throws another curve, conflicting data, overlapping locks meant to provoke a snap decision. Rachel doesn't snap. She adjusts slow and deliberate, forcing the model to keep recalculating. Each second she holds this profile denies it the reaction it expects. The descent deepens further. This is the point of no return, the altitude where escape costs more than commitment. Rachel feels it pass beneath her like a threshold, unmistakable. She doesn't flinch. She keeps speaking, low and even, anchoring her wingman to her voice, to the rhythm of the dive. I'm here, she says. Follow me. The city fills the canopy now, rushing up to meet them. Rachel flies straight into it. Not with defiance, not with fear, with absolute control. The system doesn't understand what's happening. It was built to read spikes, heart rate, control input variance, reaction lag. It knows fear. It knows panic. It knows aggression dressed up as confidence. What it doesn't recognize is stillness. Rachel's descent is smooth to the point of defiance. Not rushed. Not tentative. The jet slides downward along a line that isn't prescribed, isn't forbidden, just unanticipated. Her inputs are minimal, deliberate, almost gentle. Inside the cockpit, the warning tones lose their rhythm. They begin to overlap incorrectly. Threat envelopes hesitate, recalculating faster than they should, as if the system itself is second-guessing its own conclusions. Data instability detected. A controller says somewhere on the net, confusion leaking into his voice. Rachel doesn't respond. Her focus is absolute now, narrowed to the present moment. The city rushes up beneath her, buildings stretching tall and close, but she feels no urgency to outrun them. She adjusts her angle by fractions, letting the jet breathe, letting physics do what it's always done when respected. Her wingman's breathing steadies. Not because the danger has lessened, but because her voice has. I've got you, Rachel says quietly. Match my rate. Ignore the noise. The words cut through everything else. The system throws another layer at them, late, almost desperate. New vectors flash into existence, but they don't align properly. The geometry fractures, threat arcs intersecting where they shouldn't. Rachel sees it happen in real time. The model is choking. Her comm has become an input the system can't categorize. There's no escalation curve for this. No precedent. The AI pushes harder, then pulls back, oscillating between responses, flooding the airspace with conflicting cues that cancel each other out. Control, we're seeing erratic behavior in the sim, someone says. It's not stabilizing. Rachel feels it too, not as fear but as imbalance. The environment that once pressed in with certainty now wavers, unsure of its own rules. She holds her course. The descent continues, steady and unbroken, until the city below seems to pause, just for a heartbeat, as if waiting for permission to exist. Then everything stutters. Threat tones cut out mid-chime. Visual overlays flicker, misaligning with the real horizon. Buildings blur at the edges, their outlines dissolving into raw desert beneath. A sharp crack of static tears through the comms. Terminate exercise. A voice snaps, higher now, strained. Terminate now. The words barely finish before the system collapses. The augmented layers vanish in an instant, stripped away like smoke in high wind. The city is gone. The threats are gone. The fire, so carefully constructed, so meticulously fed, simply ceases to exist. Rachel's jet flies on, suddenly alone in open sky. Silence pours into the cockpit. Not the tense quiet of anticipation. The deep, hollow stillness of something ended abruptly. Rachel eases the nose level, hands steady, heart pounding now that there's room for it to be heard. Her wingman exhales shakily over the radio. A long breath he seems to have been holding since the dive began. I'm still with you, he says, disbelief edging his voice. Rachel allows herself a single breath of relief. On the ground, no one speaks. In control rooms and observation decks, screens fill with error codes and frozen data traces. Analysts stare at graphs that make no sense. Lines flattening where spikes should be, predictions collapsing into null space. The AI model loops, unable to reconcile the outcome with its training set. It wasn't beaten by risk. It was broken by composure. Viper flight, command finally says. Voice carefully neutral. Hold position. Further instructions to follow. Rachel acknowledges, her reply clipped and professional. She looks out through the canopy at the endless blue, the desert stretching wide and indifferent below. The fire that once crowded her vision feels distant now, unreal. For the first time since the exercise began, she feels the full weight of what just happened. Not as triumph, not as victory, but as something quieter and more profound. She didn't outfly the system. She didn't overpower it. She denied it the reaction it needed to complete the story it was trying to tell. The past doesn't press in anymore. It loosens. In the empty airspace, with nothing left to respond to, Rachel realizes the truth with startling clarity. She didn't survive the fire. She changed it. And in the silence that follows, the sky feels wider than it ever has before. The debrief room feels smaller than it did before. Screens line the walls, paused on frozen data. Flight paths, threat envelopes, timelines that no longer move. The air is still, heavy with the kind of quiet that follows something irreversible. Rachel sits at the table, hands folded, posture composed. Her flight suit bears the dust and creases of the day, but she doesn't fidget. She doesn't look at the screens. Colonel Dana Whitaker stands at the front of the room. For a long moment, she says nothing. Then she exhales and rests her palms against the table, leaning forward slightly, not in authority, but in candor. We need to talk about why that scenario existed, Whitaker says. No one interrupts. The model you flew today, Whitaker continues, was built from legacy data. A training accident that occurred years ago. Rachel keeps her eyes steady. Whitaker's gaze settles on her. Your mother's. The word lands without ceremony. No lowered voice. No euphemism. A quiet acknowledgement at last. The official report never told the whole story, Whitaker says. Not because of malice. Because of fear. We needed a clean lesson. A controllable one. She pauses. Your mother didn't hesitate, Whitaker adds. She identified a system failure early and tried to manage it alone. The doctrine at the time gave her no other option. Rachel nods once. I know, she says. The simplicity of her answer shifts the room. Whitaker straightens. What you did today exposed a flaw we've been training around instead of through. You didn't break the scenario. Rachel meets her eyes. I didn't fight it. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't explain further. Whitaker holds her gaze for a beat longer, then inclines her head. A small, unmistakable gesture of respect. That will be addressed, Whitaker says. Immediately. The debrief concludes without applause, without commentary. Pilots file out quietly, conversations subdued, thoughtful. No one stops Rachel. No one avoids her. Outside, the sun is lower now. The heat softened into long shadows across the tarmac. Rachel walks alone to a small office tucked away from the flight line, a place she's been before. She sits at the terminal. The classified footage loads quickly this time. The frozen frame appears, the one just before the dive. The moment that never finished. Rachel studies it one last time. She doesn't linger. With a steady hand, she deletes the file. The screen goes blank. She opens a new recording window. The indicator light glows softly. Rachel leans forward, resting her forearms on the desk. When she speaks, her voice is calm, measured, clear in a way that needs no emphasis. If you're watching this, she says, you're standing at a point where the noise gets loud, where the system pushes you to choose fast or get out. She pauses, choosing her words carefully. Control isn't about pushing harder. It's about staying present when everything tells you not to. She stops the recording. Outside, a jet roars overhead, climbing into the evening sky. Rachel closes the terminal and stands. She doesn't look back at the screen. As she leaves the room, her steps are unhurried, her shoulders light with something that feels like release. Not victory, not triumph, just truth. And as the door closes behind her, the words remain, steady and final. The fire didn't take my mother. Silence did. If the story stayed with you, let me know what you felt in the comments. What moment hit hardest, and why? If you want more stories like this, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves powerful military storytelling.